today and tomorrow is parables. And the question for today is this: why did Jesus use parables? Did he just like to tell stories? Or is there some special connection, some appropriate connection between the message of Jesus and parables? Is there some connection between the medium and the message? And maybe even the medium is the message. So today I'm going to look at the message of Jesus and why parables. And tomorrow I want to look at parables by Jesus, the ones we know about, the prodigal son, good Samaritan, and then this bad habit that the evangelist picked up from Jesus of making up stories about him. He had this bad habit of making up stories about God, and they picked it up and started doing the same to him, which we don't like, of course. We like parables by Jesus. We don't like parables about Jesus. That's tomorrow. So today, what's the message of Jesus, and what's peculiarly appropriate between the message and the medium? So the message. Let me get a couple of words out that are very important. The first word, Greek word, eschaton. E-S-C-H-A-T-O-N, adjective, eschatological. If you've had the bad luck of ever running into scholars, you've probably met that word. You can drop it at a cocktail party and see how far it gets you. But it's a crucial word to understand what's going on. So let me unpack it a bit. Eschaton is an ordinary Greek word. It just means the end. If there's a line for lunch after this and there's a long line and you go around looking, if you're speaking Greek, you'd be looking for the eschaton. And it's got nothing to do with theology. You're looking for the end of the line. So eschaton means the end. Now, everything then depends on end of what. So, what did it mean in the first century, eschaton? The Jewish people had been through, well, their faith was, God is just. God is a God of distributive justice and restorative righteousness. That was their faith. And besides, God was in control of the universe. That was also their faith. But their experience was that the world is very unjust and that they seem to be getting far more than their fair share of its injustice. One dreary empire after another, the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Medians and the Persians and the Macedonians and the Romans. When's it going to end? So eschaton is about when's it going to end? We've been on the kicking end of this. Our faith says God is just. Our experience says the world is unjust. When are you going to do something about it? Up there? So eschaton is not, let me begin with a negative. It is not about the end of the world. Don't let anyone ever tell you that, because nobody in the ancient world, Jew or Christian, or pagan for that matter, could imagine the end of the world as everyone in this room can, because we now know how to do it. In fact, we can do it atomically and biologically and chemically and demographically and ecologically. And we're only up to E. We've hardly got going. So of course we can imagine the end of the world. The ancient world, God had created the world and stamped every bit of it good, 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 very good. It would be embarrassing for God to end the world. It would be an admission that the whole thing was some kind of a mistake, like recalling the car to the factory, as it were. Eschaton is about the end of evil and violence and war and oppression and injustice and everything else you can think of that's bad upon this transfigured earth. That is their dream. I don't want to say that's their hope. That's their faith. Because how can you hold on to a just God and an unjust world without giving up on one of them? So their faith demanded, God will overcome someday. That's called eschatological faith. Now, They're very clear, by the way, of what the world is going to look afterwards. They're not at all clear how it's going to happen. You'd imagine probably a blinding flash of divine lightning, as it were. The world will be peaceful, the world will be no war. All of that is quite clear. Swords beaten into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks, everyone under their own vine and their own fig tree, not somebody else's, and no fear. All of that is clear. How is not ever mentioned? So, a second word we have to introduce. Apocalypsis. Apocalyptic in English. Apocalypsis is an ordinary Greek word again. It means a revelation. So, an apocalyptic eschatologist. Sounds like a serious rash, doesn't it? An apocalyptic eschatologist is somebody in the first century, for example, that announces, I have a great revelation from God. About what? About the eschaton. Now, my translation for the term eschaton, which you can now wipe out and replace by the great divine cleanup of the earth. Please put all of that in capitals. The great divine cleanup of the world. That's what we're talking about. In the first century, under the Roman Empire, the most efficient and I suspect the longest enduring empire in the whole history of the time, you're underneath that. And you're listening to an apocalyptic eschatologist. What type of revelation do you want? Supposing the apocalyptic eschatologist says, oh, about 1,000 years from now, the kingdom of God is going to be established on earth. He would be an ex-apocalyptic eschatologist immediately. The audience would just, phew. What everyone wants to hear is how soon. In our lifetime. If it's not in our lifetime, get lost. In our lifetime. And tell us why. Persuade us that it's going to happen soon. It's like we might want today, please persuade us the recession won't get worse and it'll be soon over. They want the same thing. Tell us how soon. So an apocalyptic eschatologist in the first century is somebody who has a message from God about the imminence, the any day nowness of the great divine cleanup. Okay? Let me turn to Jesus. Jewish eschatology, which is the matrix for Jesus, emphasize very much the imminence. Any day now it's going to happen. It has to happen. It's getting worse. What Jesus does is what is called a paradigm shift. Do you know that word? When any tradition has been going on, it could be in science, it could be in literature, it could be in politics, it could be in anything. It could be in a foreign policy, a domestic tradition. When it's been going on traditionally the way it's always been and everyone grows up, this is the way it is. And then something happens and it shifts. There's a swerve in the tradition. And usually when there's a swerve in the tradition, it's kind of a scary thing because you don't know where it's going. The old thing looked pretty much the same. So everyone pretty much is saying, including John the Baptist, any day now it's happening. And Jesus comes up with this extraordinary claim. And please hear how absolutely almost weird, that's a polite word for stupid it sounds. Jesus says, it's not coming soon, it's here already. Imagine yourself in the audience hearing that. Imagine somebody from the back of the audience, Jesus, excuse me, got a question here. Did you say here or did you say near? Works in Aramaic too. No. And Jesus says, I'm saying it is here already. But Jesus, how can you say that? I understand you can always keep saying it's coming near, and unless you're unwise enough to give a date, as we know, soon extends for at least 2,000 years. Soon is a very elastic word. Politics and religion. So, Jesus, I love your stuff. Your parables are great. Haven't a clue what they mean, but they're great. How can you say the kingdom of God is here? Look around you, nothing has changed. What's-his-face is still on his throne in Rome, and Antipas is still in his palace, and nothing has changed. And you're claiming it has arrived? Huh? Now, the only thing Jesus could possibly say, and in fact he does say, don't you see what has been happening? You people have been waiting for God to do it by divine intervention. And God has been waiting for you people to do it with God by collaboration. You've been waiting for God to do it for you, and God has been waiting for you to do it with God. No wonder nothing is happening. Still true after 2,000 years and 2 million Christians. We're waiting for God to do it. So my term for what Jesus is announcing is a collaborative eschatology, a participatory eschaton. He's not telling people, wait, be ready. He's telling people it will not happen. Nothing will happen unless you collaborate with God. And this is very serious, because you're not claiming, well, let's keep mentioning God, but really we could do it. The message from Jesus is you will not be able to do it without God, and God will not do it without you. Let me summarize that from 2 African bishops, one from North Africa and one from South Africa, about 1.5 millennium between them, who say exactly the same thing, and they summarize Christianity as succinctly as Jesus did. Augustine, Bishop of Hippo Regius in modern Algeria. God made you without you. God will not justify you without you. God made you without you. God will not justify you without you. And then in 1991, Desmond Tutu, Archbishop of Cape Town, cited Augustine and actually vastly improved him. Cited him wrong, but did it better. He said, God without you will not, as you without God cannot. God without you will not, as you without God cannot. That is the heart of Christianity. Now, supposing, let's imagine, that is the message of Jesus. It's a collaborative eschaton. It's a participatory kingdom. Nothing is going to happen without collaboration. What would be the appropriate medium for that? Why are parables appropriate for that type of a message? First of all, ignore what Mark 4, chapter 4 says. Mark chapter 4 confuses riddle and parable. They are both interactive modes of speech. You can't really tell yourself a good parable. And it's really difficult to give yourself a good riddle. Try it. But they're not the same. They are interactive. They presume an audience. But they're not the same. So let's leave Mark chapter 4 aside. What's a parable? First of all, don't think of Jesus saying the parables as we have them in the New Testament, which would take maybe, say, 5 minutes maximum to tell the Good Samaritan parable. Maximum. And if a kid coughed in the crowd and missed the word Samaritan, blows the whole thing. Give Jesus an hour with an oral audience who are not going to be polite like you people are and not interrupt. An oral audience is going to talk back and talk against one another. So an hour, maybe miming it out. And very interactive and very disruptive. And that is the function of a parable. It's to lure you into thinking. It's to provoke you into thinking. Imagine Simeon, let's say, goes home to Rebecca, and he says, heard a very wise man this morning. He was talking about sowing. He said we have to watch for the birds, and watch for the path, and watch for the thistles, and watch for the rocks. Wow, learned a lot this morning. Simeon Bar Nitwit. We knew all that. You've just wasted another morning, says Rebecca. Well, but that's what he said. It's a parable, dummy. Huh? It's not about sowing. Well, what is it about, Rebecca? I don't know what it's about, but it's not about sowing. Why didn't he just say what he wanted to say? Because he wants you to do what you never do, Simeon. Think. It's not about sowing, so what's it about? So the lure of a parable, the provocation of a parable, the annoyance of a parable, is that you might go home saying, I don't know what that meant, but I don't like it. I'm not sure about the Samaritan parable, but I don't think I like it. If I figure out what it means, I'll probably really dislike it. So the function of a parable, we'll get more examples of this tomorrow, the function of a parable is to participate. It's to lure the audience into argument. If at the end of a parable, the audience files past Jesus and says, lovely parable this morning, Rabbi, then it's a total failure. Total failure. Don't use it again, Jesus. You blew it. If they start arguing with one another, well, I don't think any Samaritan would ever help a Jew. Well, I know a Samaritan, a good guy. Besides, why are you always picking on priests and Levites? You're so anti-clerical. I know a Levite and he's a good guy. And besides, 2 denarii isn't enough for staying in an inn. You know, all of that stuff is exactly what you want the audience to do, because you're luring, provoking, annoying your audience into participation. So, parables are participatory pedagogy. Isn't that beautiful? Parables are participatory pedagogy. It's like if your message is about collaboration, your message is about participation, so should your medium. It should be luring people into thinking, by not doing what I'm doing right now, giving a sermon. It's telling a story which is calculated to trap them into discourse. Let me exemplify from the Good Samaritan. Supposing Jesus told that story and mentioned no names. Supposing he simply said a person was going down, a second person passed, a third person passed, a fourth. Said everything in the whole story, but no names. No priest, no Levite, no Samaritan. Okay? You could imagine your audience sitting there and saying, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we should do that. If we ever found somebody dying in the ditch, yeah, love your neighbor. Remember that stuff in Deuteronomy? Yeah, we should probably do that. It would be kind of nicely massaging their best intentions. Nobody would be annoyed. They mightn't even argue back. What's to argue about? They know they should do it. Now let's imagine Jesus ups the ante a bit. Keeps the same story now. And he simply mentions a priest and a Levite passed by the man in the ditch, and then a third person stops and helps. Now there might be some turmoil. You're going to have some people saying, as I just said, how come you're always so you're always picking on the priests? I know the local priest. He's a good guy. He would have stopped and helped. You're just mean. You're prejudiced. Now you're going to get some discussion about priests and Levites and clergy and all the rest of it. Jesus tries another version of the parable. Priest and Levite. And then he puts the Samaritan in the ditch. So a Samaritan's been beaten up and is lying in the ditch, and it's a Jew passing by. Okay, now there's a little bit more nervousness in the audience, but okay, that's, maybe, there is that stuff in the law about the resident alien, and maybe if a Samaritan's in our territory, it's sounded like, maybe we should do it. No, we shouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it to us. Yes, we should. You could get an argument on that. But what Jesus does is really provocative. He puts the Jew in the ditch, and the Samaritan stops to help. And of course, we say Good Samaritan, and we don't think a thing about it. We've just said, square circle in the first century, and there's no problem. You would have to get the same thing today. You would take somebody that we consider outlaw, the outcast, and make them the hero of the story. Try telling a story, I suppose, on television about the good terrorist. You know, you can put in your own person. This is going to really get the audience riled up. Why did you do that, Jesus? If you want to give us a nice message that we should help somebody who's in distress, even our enemy, yeah, we'll go with you a little bit along that. We're not going to do it, of course, but we like the idea. But you put the Samaritan as the hero. And then at the end, you told us, go and do likewise. But we're all Jews. How can we do likewise? Does he mean we should troll up and down the road between Jerusalem and Jericho looking for semi-corpses? I mean, you're forced to think, and nobody in their right mind is going to think, okay, now, what he wants me to do is stop being a Jew, become a Samaritan, get myself a donkey and some denarii, cruise up and down that road till I find the corpse. Of course not. And do you sense immediately how absolutely absurd it would be if after Jesus tells that parable and says, go and do likewise, somebody raises their hands, excuse me, Jesus, did that really happen? It wouldn't just be unwise, it would be a great way of dragging a huge red herring across the whole thing. Supposing somebody did that. Jesus, did that really happen? You know, I've been on that road, and it is a dangerous road, and you're right, it does go down quite a bit. And I've seen a donkey, so yeah, that must have happened, right? Jesus, this is just local gossip. Did you hear the one about the Samaritan, like? Jesus would have to hope that somebody in the audience is going to say again, it's a parable, dummy. If they don't, he's in serious trouble. If the whole discussion is whether this actually happened, then of course the whole thing has been missed. And he's going to have to try another one. I want us to watch. This is going a little bit towards tomorrow now. If we want to raise only issues of historicity about parables, then we have deliberately, intentionally, I think, successfully avoided the issue. Let us debate the historicity of the Good Samaritan, because God knows we have no intention of going and doing likewise. So, the message of Jesus, we are called to collaborate with God to make God's world a reality here below. Or as the Our Father says, the kingdom of God is about the will of God for this earth. And if this is the message of Jesus, then the medium most appropriate, the way most likely to lure an audience, to provoke an audience into thinking, is parable. So, in conclusion, parables are participatory pedagogy for a participatory eschatology. Try that one at your next cocktail party. Thank you. My blessing is collaborative. It's participatory. God won't do it alone. We can't do it alone. And therefore, parables whose function is to lure you, seduce you, provoke you into thinking is a collaborative medium. It's intended to get you going. So today I want to talk about parables by Jesus and parables about Jesus. The two types. And again, of course, the function is to make you think. Remember from yesterday also, warned you that at the end of the Good Samaritan parable, Jesus says, go and do likewise. And it would totally ruin the parable if everyone in the audience started into an argument. Did this really happen? Did he make up this story? Or did it happen? Watch how that question, which is valid in itself and worthy of at least 1 second's thought, could derail the whole thing. Let's not talk about going and doing likewise. Let's chat about whether it really happened. So, parables by Jesus. The first book I wrote 40 years ago was called In Parables, The Challenge of the Historical Jesus. One of the difficulties in writing a book about parables is we all want to tell you what they mean. And what they mean is to provoke you. So you can't really tell what they mean. You can sort of see what they might do to the audience. But it's really interactive, so it's what happens in the audience. That's why we don't like writing books about parables. We like to tell you, here's what it means. I experimented with this with students at DePaul University, and it's really great to do this with undergraduates because they're magnificently unchurched. They haven't been told the right answer. This is what it means if they've read Luke, for example. Just tell them a parable. What do you think it means? And then some student will be silenced for a while. You stare at one another for at least 5 minutes. And then some student will say what it means. And at that point, somebody else knows what it doesn't mean. They didn't know it until 1 second ago. That's how it works. Okay. Parables by Jesus. One of the things that keeps coming up as provocation in these parables, whether it works or not, is to get people to understand the difference between distributive justice and retributive justice, between the way God wants God's world distributed fairly and punishment. That's one thing that comes up. But the audience has to work on it. I'm not saying that's what it means. Second one is the difference between personal individual justice, how we handle one another, that I don't cheat you or steal from you, and systemic or structural justice, which is far harder to see. It's kind of that line item in a budget that guarantees that 6 months from now, a certain group who aren't well organized and don't vote are really going to be hurt. And it's sort of mysterious. Nobody kind of did it. But it happens. So let me give you 2 examples. But I want you to imagine the crowd responding. And it's quite possible that some of these parables didn't work. People just... Imagine, for example, if somebody listened to the Good Samaritan and said, I got it, Jesus, got it, got the point. 2 people passed by and 1 person stopped. Always go with the majority. Got it, Jesus. Stick with the 2. Now, Jesus has to hope that somebody screams, you're an idiot. That's not what it means. But if the whole audience says, yeah, very wise, stick with the clergy. Priests and Levite pass by, stay away from the Samaritans. Jesus is finished. Move on. Get another parable. Get another audience. So, for example, the dishonest manager, the steward, who takes the chits of debt that's owed to his master and changes them, reduces them. Now that's a story. Give Jesus, half an hour to tell this whole story with all sorts of dramatic details. What might be the response? Well, some people in the audience would be peasants who've always been on the receding side of death. Others might be small-time stewards themselves. And there might be even, well, there can't be any absentee landlords there because they're absentee by definition, but there might be one visiting. That whole group is going to start, is that right to do? Well, he's cheating the master. Yeah, but the master is cheating him by adding. So you're hoping that in the interaction, they will begin to see, well, there's 2 types of funny stuff going on. There is me cheating you. Yeah, we know all about that. But then, my language now, how come the system always cheats us? Now, if it works, that's going to come up. A better even example. Remember the workers in the vineyard. The vineyard owner, it's high harvest in the vineyards, he goes out at, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 5 o'clock, brings workers into the vineyard. Then, when it's evening, 6 o'clock, sunset, he gives everyone a full day's pay, a silver denarius, which would be a good day's pay for a laborer. And if a day laborer worked every day, it would be great pay. But of course, a day laborer is somebody who looks for work every day, not gets it. But anyway, everyone gets the same pay. And right away, from the time of Matthew till today, we zero in on that. Is that fair? We zero in on personal, individual justice or injustice. Was that fair for me to do to you? But wait a minute. Back up the justice wagon. They've been told that it's a vineyard owner. Now, most of the audience, being peasants probably, are going to know that that means land has been taken out of barley and used for vines. 5% they calculated return on barley, 7 on vines. You have to have a fair amount of capital to set up a vineyard. There's already prickles going up. We don't like this guy. We don't like vineyard owners. And he's a cheapskate. He goes out 6, 9, 12, 3, 5. He's too cheap to go out and bring in everyone in the morning he wants. He creeps out every few hours and just brings in the amount he wants. And then at the end of the day, he does "Aren't I marvelous?" And then there's the kicker line, the line that's in there to make certain that the audience is going to get it. When he goes out at 5 o'clock, he says, "Why stand you here all the day idle?" And you can imagine them saying through gritted teeth, "Because nobody has hired us, you idiot." Always blame the poor for being lazy. Nothing new there. Now, will nobody in the audience get that one? Will nobody say, "Wait a minute. Why did he say that? These people spent the whole day looking for work. They weren't lazy." And somebody might say, I think this is Jesus' prayer, somebody will say, "How does it work out like that, Rabbi? Isn't it strange that at high season in the vineyard, it just works out in favor of the vineyard owner? He doesn't have to go out at 6 and play top denaries to get all the laborers. There's so much labor available that he can go out at 5 o'clock and know they'll still be there and then blame them. Isn't that a marvelous system that just happened to work out like that? Extraordinary, isn't it? It works out in favor of the vineyard owners. Now, if nobody picks it up, if the whole discussion is, "Well, I think he should have given a little more to the guys who were there all day, and if he wanted to be generous, he could give, 3 to them," and then the audience blew it. It didn't work. Jesus will have to put in more provocative lines to make certain it happens. In my language, if it really works, they're going to learn, now my language, the difference between systemic structural injustice that sets up a system that guarantees the poor will get hurt, and personal individual justice, or even charity. They're going to learn that. And of course, it's all over the Bible. It's not like it's just been invented by Jesus. So, parables by Jesus. Other examples. Also by Jesus, there are not only parabolic stories, there are parabolic actions. Parabolic actions. A parabolic action, for example, would be during the Vietnam War if somebody went into a draft office and poured blood all over the draft cards. That's a parabolic action. And we know what it means. It's a descent from the war. 2 parabolic actions in honor of Lent and Holy Week. When Jesus goes up to Jerusalem on what we call Palm Sunday, he goes there to make a parabolic action against Roman imperialism, that is the entry into Jerusalem, and conservative religious collaboration with it, that is the incident in the temple. Both of those are parabolic actions. Jesus rides into Jerusalem on a donkey. It's not that he's come all the way from Galilee and he's really dead beat and he needs a donkey for the last few minutes. In fact, it looks like it's a nursing donkey. The little colt is trotting along beside. The original cover of our last week had that so you could see that it's a nursing female donkey with the colt beside her, which sends a very clear message. If you're doing a demonstration, you want to make certain the audience gets it. You don't want them to think, well, he was just tired. Riding on a female donkey, a nursing donkey? It's a lampoon caricature of the way a conqueror enters a city. It's not the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, it's the anti-triumphal entry into Jerusalem. It's a demonstration. And everyone knows it, it's been set up. Go get the donkey, we need it now, says Jesus. Now is the time. It's a demonstration, a parabolic action, a demonstration. And he quotes Zachary, which talks about the Messiah coming in on a donkey. At the same time, this was written way back by Zachary in the 4th century, Alexander was lunging down the Levantine coast, destroying Tyre, destroying Gaza, and everyone knew exactly how a conqueror entered the city. The second one. The very next day, the tandem demonstration. Jesus goes into the temple and reenacts Jeremiah 7, the same way that Zechariah 9 on Sunday, and what we call Monday, Jeremiah 7. Jeremiah had stood in front of the temple and said, if you keep coming into the temple and think that worship of God precludes or excuses you from justice for God, then, says God, I'll destroy the temple. You have made it a den of thieves. Now, do remember that a den of thieves is not where thieves do their thieving. It's their safe house, their hideaway, their den, where they flee for safety. Jeremiah says, you have turned worship into a refuge from justice. You think as long as you make it to the temple and say, the temple, where are you? We're safe. We made it. God can't get us now. Then says God, I will destroy the temple, so you can't do that. And by the way, it almost cost Jeremiah his life. That's what Jesus is doing. He's not cleansing the temple. There's nothing to be cleansed. The people who are, changing money and everything else are the normal fiscal basis of the temple. They're not doing anything wrong. What he is doing is far more drastic. He's saying, in the name of Jeremiah, you have made worship an excuse from justice, and I'm shutting down the shop. That's what's happening. When he overturns the money changers, he destroys, symbolically of course, the fiscal basis of the temple. The temple cannot survive without the donations from all over the Jewish world. Nothing wrong has been done there. But Jesus says, you have turned my temple into a den of thieves. Do not think the people are thieving. What they have done is said, well, God's primarily interested in worship. Justice is kind of like outreach. We should do some of that stuff too. But basically it's about worship. God says, I will destroy my temple. These are parabolic actions by Jesus. Actions by Jesus. They're parables. They're intended, again, to make us think. And to make us think not just about Rome and the temple, but about ourselves in our modern world. What about parables about Jesus? To be honest with you, I don't even know where to begin. Almost the entire New Testament is filled with parables about Jesus. Of course, Jesus existed. Of course. And was crucified. But the parables take all of that and tell you what it means. Examples. We say Jesus walked on the water. And right away, after the post-Enlightenment, we all want to argue about that. Did he really do it? Nobody can do that sort of stuff. I don't believe that. Now, when in doubt, read the text. This is a new concept that Marcus and I have invented. It's called reading the text. Because you never know what you're going to find in there. It's a story, first of all. It doesn't simply say Jesus walked on water. It's a story. It doesn't say he was kind of hungry and he lit out across the lake to get home for supper. It doesn't. It tells you a story. So the first thing when you're reading a story is read the story. Usually the disciples hang out with Jesus, like moss on a tree. They're there all the time. In this case, Jesus sends them off in the boat by themselves. Quite deliberate. They're out there in the middle of the lake and they're rowing like mad and they're getting nowhere. Now, don't confuse this with the storm in the sea. This is not about the storm. It's a different story. In this story, they're just rowing like mad and they're getting nowhere. The wind's too strong against them. Then Jesus comes out walking on the waters. Yeah, no question. This is a miracle in a parable. He's walking on the waters. He's not coming out to help them. He's like out for an early morning stroll. Then they cry out. This is the kicker line. They cry out, and immediately Jesus gets into the boat, and everything was fine. Now, when I read that story, it screams at me. I'm a parable dummy. And what does it mean then, as I try to think about it? It means that by the middle of the first century, they knew the church might try and take off without Jesus in the boat. The 12, who are the symbols of the church, the 12 who represent the leadership of the church or the church itself. When they take off without Jesus in the boat, they row like mad and get nowhere. Lots of activity, no progress. It's like a rocking chair. That's a parable, and it bites. Now, do you see why it's much safer? Let's discuss whether Jesus could walk on water or not. Another one. And by the way, the person who made that up made it up completely as a parable. Made it up as much, I think, as Jesus made up the Good Samaritan. And would probably be horribly surprised at hearing us debating whether Jesus could walk on water. Say, you're missing the point. Multiplication of the loaves and fishes. Read the whole story. They're out in a desert place. They've spent the whole day preaching, no problems. It's not about starving people. It comes to the end of the day, and the disciples say, the 12 say to Jesus, send them away to get something to eat. Send them away. The biblical basis of the fast food industry. Send them away. That's their solution. And then Jesus comes up with this weird counter-proposal, you give them to eat. And they almost laugh at him. In fact, they do laugh at him. 200 denarii wouldn't pay for this whole crowd. So we have two opposing viewpoints. Send them away, give them to eat. And then something extraordinary happens in this story when you make the mistake of reading the whole story. The 12 are pulled kicking and screaming into the middle of the story. Normally they're on the side, Jesus is performing a miracle, and they're going, wow. They're not in the middle. In this case, every step of the way, Jesus forces them to do it. He says, go see if there's any food. I'm reading Mark's Gospel. When John tells that same story, by the way, John gets embarrassed that Jesus doesn't know. And he said, he just did it to test them. No. Mark got it right. He forces them to go out and find out how much food is there, and as you know, they find the loaves and the fishes. Then he tells them to have the people sit down. Then, this is terribly important, he takes the bread and the fish, and he blesses, breaks, gives. These are the Eucharistic terms. Takes, blesses, breaks, gives. This is a Eucharist. And he has the disciples hand out to the people. Now, by this stage, you're really getting it. Jesus isn't doing it directly with the people. He's forcing them into the middle. And, of course, you all know at the end there's more than you could ever imagine left over. And guess who picks up the remnants? Them. So when I read it, I think I get it, I think. The church, or the leadership of the church, however you see the 12, are all in favor of preaching, but not in favor of the distribution of food. That's not their business. Send them away. And Jesus forces them to run the show. He forces them into the middle. Find out, sit down, give, all the rest of it. And then there's another thing. Scholars often say, well, this is like the manna in the desert. Jesus, is bringing... Wait a minute. It's not. Jesus takes the food that is actually there, and as it passes through his hands, there's enough for everyone. He doesn't turn stones into food, and he doesn't bring manna down from heaven. The food that is already there is absolutely enough for everyone, with lots left over when it passes through the hands of divine justice. It ain't about multiplication, it's about distribution. And both of those, I think, are absolutely, deliberately, intentionally made up parables. two more, two final ones. Climactic ones, again, moving towards the end of Lent and Holy Week. One is from Mark, the other is from John. Both of them center on Pilate. And Pilate is one of the most important characters in the entire New Testament to understand Jesus. Because Pilate got it precisely right. Pilate crucified Jesus but didn't round up his followers. Which tells us two things. I'm now talking history. Which tells me two things. As far as Pilate was concerned, Jesus was a nonviolent resistor. He would not have crucified him publicly, wasted an afternoon squad of soldiers and iron nails on Jesus if he was just a minor nuisance. He'd have booted him out of town. He publicly, officially, legally executed him. That means he was resisting Roman law and order. But he made no attempt to round up his followers, which means he did not consider him violent. For example, look at the parable created in Mark's Gospel, where Pilate stands there with Barabbas and with Jesus, with two revolutionaries, as it were. One of them is a violent revolutionary. So Barabbas is in jail, says Mark, with all his followers. And Jesus, of course, is not in jail with all his followers. So Mark sets up a parable that contrasts the violent revolutionary and the non-violent revolutionary. And both of them, of course, are doing it in the name of their God. The other one, in John. It's the one place in Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ where a very faint smile, I think, flickered across my face. I couldn't, by that stage, do much more than faint smile. It's the scene in John between Jesus and Pilate, totally parabolic, not historical. But in Mel Gibson's rendition, Pilate says to Jesus in Aramaic, he kind of talks down to Jesus by talking Aramaic, which of course Pilate would never have done, even wouldn't have known it. And Jesus comes right back in Latin. What's the conversation? Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." You all know the phrase. And normally we tend to stop at that point, which leaves it completely ambiguous. My kingdom is not of this world. It's of the heavens, way up there. Don't worry, Pilate, it's nothing to do with you. My kingdom is not of this world. It's not of the present. It's of the future. Again, don't worry, Pilate. No problem. Or my kingdom is of the interior spiritual life and not also of the external political life. Again, no worry, Pilate. And then Jesus spoils the whole thing by going on, as Jesus tends to do so often. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were of this world, my companions would be in here fighting to get me out. Nothing could be climactically clearer. The difference, says Jesus, between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of Rome is violence. That's what it comes down to. The difference between my kingdom, the kingdom of God, and your kingdom, Pilate, the kingdom of Rome, is that yours is based on violence, and I will not even use violence to get out of here. In conclusion, parables by Jesus, parables about Jesus, parables based on things that happened, parables totally invented. When you look at them all, it finally occurs to you, Jesus is the parable of God. That's what's going on. All these others are little like butterflies to a summer. The real, clear parable is that Jesus is the parable of God. The life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus is the parable of God. And therefore, since Jesus was nonviolent, God is nonviolent. And that's what we really don't like. We want a violent God. Violent against other people, of course, but definitely violent. And we will invent a second coming and have Jesus come back and do it violently because we are profoundly dismayed by the first one. We don't like the incarnation. The whole history of Christianity is flight from incarnation. Jesus is the parable of God, and we want a different God. "O Lord," said Shakespeare's Puck, "what fools these mortals be." Thank you.